Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We are presented by CLNS Media. Today on the show, Cole Zwicker makes his weekly appearance. I had to kind of find a way to fit Cole in this week, and I know we're a day before the deadline, so it's not going to make a whole lot of sense to talk about NBA draft prospects, given the fact that, hey, some of these picks might move before we finish talking on this podcast even. But I felt it was worthwhile given that there is some interesting news in the NBA right now, and there's also a lot to talk about. So, Cole, how's it going, man?
It's going well. This is going to be one of the podcasts where we both have to monitor social media to see if any trades break. It's a great time of year.
Well, I'm monitoring social media. I'm talking to you, and I'm trying to get out my top 100 board that I have to write for tomorrow. So, like, just a busy time in my life, Cole. And I have, like, a little 5-pound dog just staring at me right now, like, why aren't you petting me? Why aren't you holding me? What's wrong? What am I doing?
Yeah, your responsibility output is definitely exceeding mine right now. That's some pressure, man.
And I think that the worst is probably the dog. The dog is just sitting there with those big bug eyes and guilty, like making me feel guilty, I guess. Look, just like, hey, come on, I'm here. Play with me.
There you go.
Before that, though, we're going to talk about the Kristaps Porzingis injury. I think that's probably the biggest news in the NBA right now, even with the trade deadline happening. He tears his left ACL. He will be out for the rest of this season, given the way that ACL injuries have kind of worked on this timeline over the course of the last year even. Jabari Parker tore his ACL midway through February or so last year. Took him until the beginning of February to come back this year. The Zach LaVine injury happened in February. He came back in January. So I think you're looking at the rest of this year and midway through next year on Kristaps Porzingis' recovery time. We'll see whenever he has the surgery officially. At the end of the day, though, what was your immediate reaction when you saw the Porzingis injury?
Damn it. I mean, it's such an overload of injuries recently with a lot of the key marquee guys, like Boogie Cousins going down. It's just tough. I mean, that's your initial reaction is you just feel really bad for him and yourself for not being able to watch him, but mostly for him, honestly. He was having such a breakout year. I know he regressed a little bit. We talked about him on an earlier podcast this year about how many difficult shots he was making, self-contested shots in the post, and that was going to regress some. But overall, he's a great player on the ascension. And now this really just alters the trajectory of the Knicks, at least from their stand or their vantage point. Like I think Ian Begley, who covers them for ESPN, tweeted today that they're going to alter their approach at the deadline as far as their strategy, not trying to maybe improve short term, but now looking more towards the long term. And you look at, they own their own picks over the next 2 years. And if Porzingis is not going to be a part of that roster on a nightly basis, they just don't have a ton of talent there. So you're looking at them, they're 10th in the standings right now, or 10th worst. You could see them falling all the way to the bottom 5, and that has huge implications for them moving forward.
So I would be surprised if they fell that far, I will say that. Before we get into the implications there, I want to talk about the implications for Porzingis, particularly. So over the course of his career, and this is something that Jared Dubin and Jeff Stotts over at In Street Clothes noted, he has had a considerable number of left side injuries. He's had a left quad injury, a left hip injury, a left IT band injury, and now a left ACL injury. Jeff Stotts noted that this could just be something being off with the kinetic chain in his left side. How much does that kind of thing worry you long term, especially with a guy in Porzingis, 7'3", kind of an unnatural frame due to the skinny nature of his body? He's still working, I think, to fill out his frame going forward. What are your impressions of how significantly the Knicks have to move forward with the idea of his injury history?
Well, you have to take every consideration into effect when it comes to making sure that he comes back 100%. I don't care how long it takes. It could be a year and a half. If he doesn't play next season at all, you have to take that fall because you have to have him at 100%. I'm not qualified to answer the medical stuff in response to this. The red flags are, as you noted, his size and kind of awkward frame. Whenever you're dealing with a recurring injury, like especially again specifically on the left side or whatever, that's tough. I mean, that's a tough situation overall that you have to manage with the utmost care moving forward. So yeah, it definitely hinders his projection if you project him forward. Like this is definitely a concern now. It's on everybody's radar about his recurring injuries and it being in a specific area. But for me, the key takeaway is just you can't rush this guy back. You have to take every precaution possible to make sure he becomes the same player that he was before. And that's going to be tough because you have to manage, fans' expectations, franchise expectations. But the key is without Kristaps, the Knicks, what they've done over the past couple of years is for naught because he is the move piece in conjunction with whoever they draft this year and depending on how Ntilikina develops.
Just for reference here, I want to talk about what Porzingis has actually done this year. 22.7 points per game, 6.6 rebounds. He's leading the NBA in blocks at 2.4. His shooting consistency has been ironed out. He's at 39% from three. Still occasionally can struggle to finish inside. 79% from the foul line. He's doing a much better job, though, as we mentioned in an earlier podcast, of creating his own shot. If that ability kind of falters at all in terms of his lateral agility and his ability to, get any sort of separation, he doesn't need a lot of separation because his release point is so high at 7'3" with 7'6" wingspan or whatever he has. But what he does need is the ability to just get a little bit of separation. And if that changes, he is a dramatically different player to where you might not be able to build around him. He might be like a second piece for you as opposed to the primary piece.
Agreed. And it could have defensive ramifications as well as far as agility. He was never the best in space, but he was capable as like a drop back guy or like a mid-level guy. And you really need his rim protection because that's where he brings that defensive value is the agility to, get across the paint, block shots with his extension. If there's any hindrance there, it becomes that much more tough.
Yeah, I mean, that's a significant concern, too, just the lateral agility. It's easy to hide someone that is that good of a rim protector. You can drop him back constantly and just hope that works out. But I'd be concerned about the way this injury affects him going forward. Additionally, he has still yet to post a season above average in terms of true shooting percentage. He's still down at 53.9% this year. I'm a little bit worried. I'm not a lot worried because I still generally believe in him as a player. I'm a little bit worried about the direction that this takes New York going forward.
Me too, and he really needs that self-creation acumen like we noted because he's not a great passer. That's something that he's been under criticism for this year is he doesn't pass at a high level out of the post. Maybe he develops that skill over time, but right now I would deem him as mostly a self-creating type, although he does help his team just with the gravity he generates as a pick-and-pop threat, opening up the lane, and his shooting's always going to be valuable as long as that sustains. But there is cause for concern. I don't want to get into too sweeping of conclusions just because I'm not qualified to do that. But yeah, it's concerning where a player that has this kind of importance to a franchise is their future is more unsuspect than it was in the past.
Yeah, and I guess that the next question here in regard to him before we move on to the direction of the franchise is what do you do with his contract now? He was eligible for a max extension this summer. I don't know that I offer that now, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to weigh the costs and benefits. What is the worst possible outcome that could arise contractually, not to do with his injury, but let's say you wait and you can still offer him that fifth year via re-signing him as a restricted free agent. You can still offer him the same amount of money. It's just guaranteeing it, a year ahead. And that's probably going to go a long way with Porzingis and ironing out that relationship. He could sign, you could give him a max qualifying offer that would make an opposing team be able to sign him to an expanded 3-year restricted free agency deal with a player option in the fourth year instead of a 2+1 deal. Worst case would be a 2+1. You could always match because you have the RFA rights. So depending on what the injury is and how they diagnose it and how he progresses moving forward, you have to entertain that now. Just wait and see approach, how he returns next season. Like you noted, probably into the season and evaluate what he is at that stage. You still have rights and you still have protection. So I don't know. It depends on what they find out with him in his rehab and how he progresses there.
The relationship dynamics here are totally fascinating to me because this is, Porzingis has not exactly been quiet about the direction of the franchise and the direction that he wants the franchise to go. So on one hand, as you mentioned, this could be a great opportunity to kind of portray your trust in him and kind of show how you believe in him and you want him to be the centerpiece of the franchise. You could offer him a 5-year contract this summer and say, hey, we're going to give you this 25% max anyway, regardless. Let's just roll with it. You know what I mean? Let's see what happens. On the other hand, if you don't do that, you say you want to kind of go forward into the next, off season and say, hey, we want to make you a restricted free agent. What that does then is it creates a situation where what if he plays well at the end of next year? What if he is not different in any tangible way and trusts himself and takes the qualifying offer and says, you know what, you didn't trust me whenever I was hurt to get back to what I needed or what I was capable of being. I've had issues with the way you've built your team throughout this entire time. I'm going to be here for one more year and then I zip. Like, there's a massive amount of theory that the Knicks have to play here in terms of the relationship dynamics and how they move forward with him going into the future.
That's really fascinating. I mean, I never really fully entertained the qualifying option route just because it rarely happens. I mean, you're talking about a substantial difference in money and guaranteed money, especially with a guy with Porzingis' injury history. Would he really bet on himself? I mean, he'd have to be pretty vehemently against the Knicks franchise to do that. I guess it's possible, it's conceivable, and if you're the Knicks and you're planning for the absolute worst case scenario, that's of course it. I mean, if he accepts the qualifying offer and leaves, you're screwed. Like that's 5 years of no return and you look really bad as a franchise. So if you really think that's an option, if you think that Porzingis is even thinking about that, and you'll be able to gauge maybe some of that by, dealing with his agent. I mean, of course, you might not get a realistic take. It's more just leveraging. But if you really do think that's an option, then you have to entertain an extension, or at least, bettering the waters as far as offering something that you feel like is a reasonable deal for him.
Yeah, I think that I offer him an extension, to be honest. I really do. I think I would just offer him a 4-year extension at his max number.
Yep. That's reasonable.
It's risky, but I think that it would go a long way toward repairing the relationship. And obviously this is all contingent on the knee being totally fine after repair. So we'll see what happens there. Let's move on to what the Knicks do from here. You mentioned that they're going to be changing direction. I like the idea of them moving Courtney Lee. We talked about that on the podcast on Monday with Matt Moore. I think there are a lot of places that he could fit. I think that there are a lot of places where Kyle O'Quinn could fit. This is a situation now, though, where the Knicks are probably not going to be competing this year. Clearly not. They're not really going to be competing next year either, because he's going to miss probably half of the season next year. So what do you do? How do you build this team now? Do you build it realistically for the 2019-2020 season? Is that where your plan is now?
In my opinion, yes. I think you have to start playing the young guys more, like start Ntilikina, get this guy higher usage, get him acclimated to the NBA game. You have to fixate on your future pieces and build for that window, planning to offer Porzingis an extension and build around him, Ntilikina, your draft picks over the next 2 years. Now you can project and kind of start evaluating the draft classes more intricately because you know that that's probably going to be your avenue. I would do exactly what you said, is start looking at your veteran guys that have some value on contenders, Courtney Lee, Kyle O'Quinn, those kinds of players, and see what kind of return you can get. You're probably not going to get, high-level draft pieces unless you take on bad salary, because that seems to be the going rate for first-round picks, is you have to take back a bad contract. I would even do that if I'm the Knicks.
I would honestly do that too, by the way. I think that we're going to get into that in a second here.
Exactly. I think that's the way you have to operate now. As before, we talked a lot about Julius Randle going there. If they can still make that an option, signing him, that's fine. But what you're really trying to do is accumulate enough assets to build forward, and from 2 to 3 years from now. And how you do that is acquiring, potentially bad salary. They have some movable veterans that could help contenders. So that's the avenue I would pursue in.
So here is my idea. The Knicks take on both Wilson Chandler and Kenneth Faried, both of whom are just on 1 year additional after this. They trade Denver Courtney Lee. And I'm trying to find like another piece, like maybe you make Lance Thomas work or something like that. Lance Thomas does have 6.5 left over the course of 3 years, though. I believe that last year is non-guaranteed, but it would be much better than paying Kenneth Faried and Wilson Chandler. You would additionally have to, take on something like Doug McDermott or something along those lines to make the money work. But you get the Knicks or you get the Nuggets first round pick in this. You essentially trade them Courtney Lee, take on Kenneth Faried and Wilson Chandler so that they get off of that salary long term, and go from there. But I guess that they're not getting enough salary relief there. You would almost have to make it so that they find salary relief somehow.
Yeah, I think the thought process is spot on. Like Denver needs to mitigate, salary next year when they started having to pay Jokic. If they decline his option and then he resigns for the max, I mean, they're going to be over the tax. So they got to get rid of some of those bigger contracts. That's the exact kind of deal I would look for, though, is future salary relief. If you can take on money that doesn't even extend that far into the future, maybe just next year, because you're not going to be competitive. So I'm right in alignment with you on that.
So, I mean, I'm still trying to figure this out. Like, the problem is here that they don't have a ton of expiring money to give out. Like Doug McDermott is expiring money that they could just say, hey, you can get rid of his cap hold in the offseason and use it for expiring. Kyle O'Quinn probably opts out of his deal, but it's not for sure. Beyond that, they don't really have anything that is absolutely 100% expiring. So it makes it harder for them to take on money to do this.
Ron Baker should be expiring if we're talking about deals in the past summer. I mean, I like Ron Baker, but for the amount that he got, the room MLE, I thought that should have been probably at least a team option the second year, but likely just a one-year contract, maybe non-guaranteed the second year. But yeah, it does make it a little bit tougher, especially for a team like Denver, who just has to have like large-scale salary relief, probably to want to part with their first-round pick.
Right.
But maybe we can find that option for a different team. I haven't gone through all the teams and stuff, but I think just the general thought process here is how the Knicks should be thinking and looking at it like 2 years in advance. So if we can get, a short-term asset, a first-round pick this year in a pretty damn good class, I think that's how you have to hit it.
Oh, here it is. This is easy. It's Portland.
Give it to me.
You move Ron Baker, you move Kyle O'Quinn, and you move Doug McDermott. That gives you $11.7 million that is likely going to be expiring. And you trade like Mo Harkless for it. And you get...
Interesting.
Or you get the first round pick along with Myers Leonard or something like that. Like you take on Myers Leonard's money. You take on... I mean, if you could find a way to take on $20 million from them, you could really help them out, I think. Like, you could really, really help them out in terms of long-term salary relief.
And I think they'd probably look into that. I think Portland would have to consider, maybe they're not going to part, I think you noted this, they're probably not going to part with both Mo Harkless and a first, but if you took Myers Leonard and you start taking, like, their worst contracts, that might be something they'd be amenable to.
Yeah, maybe it's just Evan Turner. Maybe that's just you to say, hey, we'll take on the Evan Turner deal. We'll give you... We'll give you Ron Baker. We'll give you Kyle O'Quinn. We'll give you Doug McDermott. But it gets to a point, too, where their roster's full and they actually have, like, useful pieces at the end of their roster. So it gets really hard to match the money to make it expire. They would almost have to be willing to take on Lance Thomas.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then Turner's deal goes through 2019. That's not horrible. You get 2 extra years on that. You'd like it if it was a little bit less money. I mean, that's definitely the one that kind of hurts you a little bit, I think. Maybe Myers is, $7 million cheaper in the final year.
Yeah.
So that's more – I think I'd probably target that over Turner. But, I mean, if the Blazers are hell-bent on Turner and they'll give you first-round pick compensation, maybe even some additional compensation via second-round picks, that's something I would look into.
Who else needs to save money even? Like Milwaukee, but Milwaukee doesn't have their first-round pick. It gets hard to find teams that are, like, legit trying to save a lot of money, but also have money that extends just to 2019. That's why Denver makes sense. Denver has Faried, Wilson Chandler, and Darrell Arthur. I mean, they could take on the Darrell Arthur money and help them out a little bit too. They could take on Darrell Arthur and Emmanuel Moutier's money, give back Ron Baker, give back Kyle O'Quinn, and give back Doug McDermott, and take on the first round pick or take on like multiple seconds or something.
Yeah, it's tough to find teams that want to shed salary and that are also willing to include that first round pick and actually have the first round pick to include. There's a lot of contending teams that have already dealt that short term asset. If you want to take on a future first rounder, that's not going to have as much value especially if a team's not going to make it like really lightly protected or unprotected. So I would think maybe there's a couple teams. Denver was the one that really stuck out to me just because everybody knows that they're in a financial crunch next year, and that's a situation where you can kind of predict how they want to operate.
Yeah, I think that that's what the Knicks should be doing, though. They should be trying to take on salary over the next 2 years from a team that needs to shed salary and, is willing to attach a pick to it, I guess.
Agreed.
It gets hard to find that team, though, as you mentioned, because I don't think San Antonio is going to do that. Golden State doesn't really have a reason to do it. Boston doesn't have any atrocious money on its books. Indiana doesn't really have any awful money on its books that extends past this season. So that's the move, I think, though, if you can find a way to do it.
Maybe Washington, too, with Mahinmi, because I know that they're going to be in a crunch moving forward. I don't know if you want to take on that big of a deal or if you can make the money work there, but that's just another team we talked about when we talked about the 2016 offseason. They're one of the teams that just stuck out as a team that's in the tax right now that would probably do well long-term to parlay some of that off into – and this is a team that has attached picks before to deals at the trade deadline, usually for an upgrade, but maybe they'd consider doing it if you were willing to take on Mahinmi's deal.
Yeah, and the reason I'm not bringing up Charlotte here is, again, that most of their deals extend to 3 years, not just 2 years. I think that the sweet spot for the Knicks is you really want to find teams that have just 1 extra year of salary, not 2 extra years of salary.
Agreed.
So, that's what the Knicks should be doing, I think. Just full stop here going forward. The Knicks also made a move today to trade Willy Hernangomez to Charlotte for their 2020 and 2021 second-round picks. Those are deals that actually could be picks that could actually be pretty good. And given that it seemed like Willy Hernangomez didn't want to be in New York anymore, that seems fine, I guess. I don't understand why Charlotte made that deal, just given that they already have Dwight Howard, Cody Zeller, and Frank Kaminsky. Does this make sense either way to you?
In a value vacuum for Charlotte, it does. With the second round pick, you're looking for a guy like Hernangomez, like a third big who can be that kind of high usage bucket getter off the bench. He brings rebounding. He can score around the basket. So I get it from a value standpoint, but as you noted with the roster construction, you're already giving all those minutes out to, Zeller, Dwight Howard, and then you want to get Kaminsky there when you can afford to, just to have that added floor spacing. So where is he really getting minutes here as far as in that actual rotation? Maybe he does next year. Maybe they flip other assets and opens up time for him. But that's what's stood immediately is, of course, the narrative of another white center in Charlotte. I thought it was a fair price, honestly. 2020, 2021, the only thing is that Charlotte could be really bad. And those picks, like you noted, could be really valuable. They could be top 30, 8, top 35 picks potentially. Who knows by that standpoint. So I thought the value of the trade was fine. If the well was really as poison as we thought, with New York and Hernangomez, getting 2 future seconds for him. They already waived Johnny O'Brien, so he was just kind of a filler in there. So, and getting a trade exception for Hernangomez as well, I thought it was fine for them too. I will just generally note as well that there's a decent chance that this Knicks front office doesn't get to actualize those picks. Just because, I'd imagine that this buys them 2 years, but now we're getting into the 2020 and 2021 drafts. That's a long ways out. That is even past the Porzingis injury that we're talking about here. This is after all of the terrible money on Charlotte's books expires. So I don't know, man. It's a weird this is a weird deal to me. I don't understand it for Charlotte because I don't like the roster construction. I don't understand it for New York because they're not going to get any value from it for the next 3 years. Yeah, it just must have been the relationship was that soured and they just wanted him out of there. And you're probably not going to get a first rounder for Hernangomez. If he's not good enough to play for your team and your team's not very good or you don't want him to, it's hard to sell kind of an offense-only 5 in the modern game that's more of a backup. There's just not a huge market. We've seen that with even Nerlens Noel, who's a completely different archetype of player than Hernangomez, of course, but just it's hard to fetch value for 5s in this market. So 2 future seconds, both of the chances could be pretty decent. I think that's a fine return, but like you noted, it might not actually do this current iteration of the Knicks front office any good.
Let's move on. Let's talk about the Lou Williams contract. Lou Williams signs an extension, 3 years, $24 million. Mark Deeks reported that it is a flat $8 million a year for Lou Williams. 3 years, 3-year extension on top of the year after, or the year that he's in the middle of right now, means that he cannot be traded going forward for the next 6 months, which means he'll be a member of the Los Angeles Clippers at least until August, meaning he'll get past the early offseason portion here that is always so active, and he'll be on the team there. My initial reaction is that this was not enough for Lou Williams to not hit the market and try and become a free agent this summer. What was your immediate reaction to the Lou Williams contract?
It was low. I mean, just honestly, I tweeted out earlier the ramifications, like the max he could have earned under the extension via the 120% of the average salary, which was a little bit over $30 million. So I thought he would at least get that if he was going to agree to the extension. That's more than the mid-level. That is, again, kind of the 3-year version iteration of that Norman Powell, Josh Richardson deal, same kind of confines. Yep. So when you saw the $24 million and then you saw the final year was only $1.5 million guaranteed, I didn't see really the carrot to this. Like, I don't understand why he would take this unless he really has information, or his agent does, about the market this summer, which is everybody knows is going to be more suppressed. But even with him, like, you could sign with a contender for the mid-level, and that's more money than this, guaranteed. So it was just kind of suspect. Honestly, I don't know exactly how to go about it. I know he noted that he didn't want to go to a different city, a different team again. Maybe that was the ultimate difference, and that was the Clippers' leverage is, okay, if you want to stay here, this is the deal. But I did think he could do better. I think Lou Williams is a high-level, 6-man scoring type. And in this market, even if it's suppressed, he could have demanded the entire mid-level. So it was low.
Let's just be kind of clear here for a minute, too. Lou Williams is a high-level starter right now. He is a borderline all-star in the Western Conference right now. He's averaging 23.3 points, 5.3 assists, 38% from three, 90% from the foul line, which is incredibly important given how we all know he's capable of getting to the foul line basically whenever he wants. 22 PER, 59 true shooting percentage. He's been incredibly effective offensively. All of his advanced metrics look great. Turnover rate of 13%, which is really low for a guy who handles the ball as much as he does. This is a weird contract to me. You brought up the fact that you would have expected him to sign for the max that he was capable of getting on a 3-year deal, which, as you mentioned, right around 30.5 million, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a strange deal though, because as you said, the mid-level exception should have been there for him this summer. Even if you believe that he was someone that was going to get left out in the cold, I don't really believe that. I think that a team that's contending probably would have gone and tried to sign him, because that would have been a smart move. And even if you believe that the market this summer for mid-level exceptions, at least full mid-level exceptions, which will start at $8.6 million, will be relatively suppressed due to the fact that a lot of teams are already up against the apron in terms of cap holds, in terms of everything that they need. It's hard for me to believe, though, that there weren't going to be at least 15 teams that didn't have either the cap space to sign him for $8.6 million with raises, or the mid-level exception, which starts at $8.6 million and can go up to 5% raises. That's what makes this one hard to swallow for me. Because, 3 years, $24 million, not something to scoff at. That's, a very useful, a very, good living for Lou Williams to be making. And I don't know that necessarily he would have been making a crazy amount more than this, at the end of the day, but it's still not quite as much as what he's worth.
Agreed. And I think what does it for me is that final year only being partially guaranteed at $1.5 million. If it was 3 years fully guaranteed, $24 million, then it can get kind of semantical. You're like, okay, well, maybe you're missing out on, $5-6 million. If you value LA that much and the lifestyle and just having a consistent franchise, sure. But again, he made $12.5 million less guaranteed than he could have gotten via this maximum extension he could have received. So you just kind of look at it, and that's the puzzling part for me, is maybe fully guaranteed 3 years, $24 million. That's still low, in my opinion. And to just correct myself, I think he's a 6-man on a good team. I think he's definitely a starting caliber player on a not so good team, but on a really good team, I think he's one of the optimal 6-men you can have. And that's why his market from the Boston types, that's why all those teams are pursuing him. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. I know this foreshadows, again, the free agency market this summer, but maybe his agent and him just kind of undershot it a little bit, didn't give himself enough credit. I think he could have done better than this, but it's his life, and if he wants to be in LA and this was the deal that was provided, I guess that's cool.
Yeah, just for reference, if he would have signed a 3-year deal at the mid-level exception with another team this summer, it would have been $27 million over the course of 3 years. It's hard for me to believe that he couldn't have at least gotten $27 million guaranteed this summer from another organization, just like it's hard for me to believe that the Clippers wouldn't have been willing to go to 30 with him and giving him his max extension number. It's not, given what he's doing right now, he's probably worth an $18 million contract a year, something like that right now.
Yeah, and I mean, in a vacuum for sure. Who knows what the market dynamics, but for his production and what he's done this season, that's an arguable point, and that's what makes this kind of just. It's a weird time to negotiate a contract when you're kind of at your apex in value, and the contract doesn't reflect that. I don't know how many times I've seen that from a player that's playing probably the best basketball of his career.
Yeah, that
would take a contract that's way beneath his market value in a vacuum. I mean, again, we don't know the dynamics of everything this summer, but it just seems low.
Right. And, like in terms of teams that actually have $18 million to spend, there aren't that many. I think there are probably like 9 or 10 in terms of teams that will have that kind of salary cap to spend. He's going to be one of the 5 or 6 best. He was going to be one of the 5 or 6 best free agents, I think, on the market this summer, especially if you take out LeBron, let's take out Kevin Durant, who probably opts out and just signs a longer deal with Golden State. Take out like a couple of the other guys who seem likely. Chris Paul, it seems likely, will probably just re-sign in Houston. But like guys who could have genuinely made themselves some money by going elsewhere, he could have made himself some good money. And I think that the problem is that he's giving himself no variance here. I'm not saying he definitely was going to get more than $24 million on the market, but it's not impossible that someone would have given him $50 million. I don't think.
It's not. You couldn't measure maybe the ceiling of what you'd receive, and there is a trade-off. There's an opportunity cost for the certainty that he received, but I don't think that he really captured what could happen in free agency. Maybe, it's like we think you're going to get around maybe 10, 11 million, perhaps, but there could be a team that would have given him 13, 14 million. I mean, that's completely within the realm of possibility, and taking this deal, you just shut yourself off to all that.
Right, and he just he captured the low end of it, too. Like, if he was getting...
Exactly.
If the Clippers could have given him $35 million, I'd have been like, okay, that makes sense. He wants to lock in. I get it. They could only give him 30. Okay, I get it. That's fine. Take $30 million. I get that you don't want to hit the market again. This one, though, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's definitely kind of selling low on what his value is. Let's move on, though. Let's not belabor this point unless you have anything else to say.
No, I was going to say, credit to the Clippers. I mean, not only are they getting a really good player on a reasonable contract, but they've also just created a potential asset next year. I mean, when he can actually be traded outside of 6 months, they now have a reasonable contract that Lewin is on for multiple years with a partial in his third year. Him being 31, I still think he'll have value around the league. So that's kind of what you do when you're a franchise like the Clippers, who's hybrid rebuilding, if we'll call it. They're not going to bottom out, but they're trying to change directions on the fly. This is kind of how you do that.
All right, the next thing I want to talk to you about, though, is just a quick little run through with the elite teams in terms of actual contention here going forward. What do you think X team should do? We're just going to play this rapid fire. Golden State, do you think they should stand pat? Do you think that they should make a move?
If they can make a minor move to upgrade their bench, I just don't see a lot of firepower. Patrick McCaw hasn't made the steps this year that we thought he would, judging off Summer League, and they just don't have a lot of pop off their bench. So if they can get kind of a contributing guy that fits their scheme, nobody really pops in my mind. I mean, Kyle O'Quinn would be a nice addition for them. I don't know what Jordan Bell's injury history or injury future is going to be when he's coming back or whatnot, or if you want him playing big minutes in the playoffs. But I would probably try to upgrade the bench if it's a reasonable cost. I mean, obviously they're already in the tax, so they're not going to pay a bunch of extra money. But if opportunity arises, I would look to buy.
Let's go to the next team here, Houston. Houston is down a first-round pick this year, which makes it a little bit more complicated. But if you're Houston, is there anything you think you can do?
I don't know. Like you noted, the lack of the first-round pick, and their roster's pretty complete, in my opinion. Like, I don't know where you'd fixate on. They have the versatility. We've talked about this. We talked about Houston for probably 20 minutes on one of the podcasts and how versatile their lineups are. They can go so many different directions. I think Houston's pretty set. I mean, this is kind of what you're going to get with them, and they're the one team that can compete with Golden State, and I think they don't really need to make any moves to get closer to Golden State. I don't know what they could really do that wouldn't be like a lateral move.
The Celtics, they've obviously been in the news quite a bit, both in terms of discussing Marcus Smart or in terms of discussing a guy like Lou Williams, who again can't be traded now, or a guy like Tyreke Evans, who is almost certainly going to be traded. What is kind of your thought on what Boston should end up pursuing?
I think maybe Tyreke would make some sense off the bench for them just as an added scoring punch. I don't know if I'd deal a first rounder for him, honestly, as an expiring contract. You might have to for Memphis to budge. I don't think they really have to do anything either, though. I mean, I'm not going to give Marcus Smart away for nothing. I mean, I think his restricted free agency rights this offseason with the market is going to be valuable. I would keep him. You're not going to get a player better than him likely in the rotation. So I think they're fine standing pat. They have Monroe coming in as their 15th guy. He hasn't signed yet to maintain that roster flexibility. So if there's a move that makes sense, that's fine. But they've already kind of made it with Monroe. I don't really see what addition they could make that would be that impactful.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you there. I'm not entirely sure that they're going to be able to make like this incredible move that pushes them over the top. I do think that getting a guy like Tyreke would help if they could find a way to do it with. I mean, if they were willing to take Yabusele and a second, would you do that?
In a second, yeah. That's the kind of deal I would look at. If you can get it for like a fringe kind of roster piece who has some young appeal that's not a first-round pick in the future, that's where I would be like, yeah, Tyreke makes sense. I just don't think, parting with their own first-rounder or anything like that would probably do enough good against a Cleveland team, for example, to make it worthwhile.
It is like kind of weird that like I just said Yabusele, like he wasn't just the 16th pick in the draft, and you're telling me that you're not willing to trade the 28th pick in the draft. That's
kind of how it goes, though.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen what Yabusele is, though, and I'm not. I mean, I guess the thing is, like, I had Yabusele at like 39 on my draft board that year. Like, I am lower on him unquestionably than what Boston is, I'm sure. So, like, what do you do there? Do you decide that this is the right move? I don't know if Tyreke is the right guy for them, to be honest, because I'd be worried about the jump shooting. He shot 29% over the course of the last month from three. That makes it, I think, a lot harder for him to kind of fit into their lineups, especially with how well Terry Rozier has played. It's hard to find the right guy for them, though. You know what I mean? Like, if I could steal Spencer Dinwiddie from Brooklyn, I think everyone's trying to steal Spencer Dinwiddie from Brooklyn right now, probably. I'd probably be willing to give them, like, Marcus Smart and a first-round pick for Spencer Dinwiddie right now. He's on a cheap contract for $1.5 million for the next 2 years. You're not going to have to worry about paying him then. He would provide better value than what Marcus Smart is because he's a better player. That's the kind of deal that makes a little bit of sense to me.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I think maybe both. That's tough to swallow, but at the same time, Dinwiddie's a really good player, and who knows if the Nets are actually going to try to move him or not. Maybe if you're Boston, I don't know how they make the salaries work, but maybe you just trade for like a Bellinelli type that's not going to cost you high capital. Maybe it's just a bench filler who can shoot. I don't know how he'd fit conceptually with their scheme. Obviously, he's like a switch guy. They rely on their wings to do a lot defensively as far as switching matchups. That's not Bellinelli's style, but maybe just acquiring an extra bench shooter that doesn't cost you like a legitimate player, even though they're already going to be full up roster-wise, so you'd have to waive or trade somebody anyway. But let's say you trade Marcus Smart, you're able to find somebody who'll give you a first-round pick for him. Then you bring in Bellinelli on just an expiring contract that maybe costs you a second-round pick. That's more of what I would probably do. I kind of agree with you on Tyreke. I think that a lot of his efficiency this year is just a hot start to shooting. He's never really shown that in his career at the highest level. So I would not, again, trade a first-round pick for Tyreke. I'm pretty steadfast on that.
Oh, so here's kind of a weird idea. Marcus Smart, Boston's first-round pick, and Abdul Nader for Spencer Dinwiddie and Joe Harris. And I think that if the Nets really wanted to push for Shimi Ojale, that they could probably do that.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that's solid for both sides, honestly. You're a little higher on Semi than I am, but I think he's a legit piece in a trade. Like, I would consider him a first-round caliber pick if we're projecting guys moving forward. Like, I was never that high on Yabusele, so that's why I was kind of more reluctant when I'm compared to like a future first-round pick next year. But with Semi, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that satisfies both sides.
Yeah, I'm in on trying to do it with Nader first.
Okay. Yeah.
That one makes a little bit more sense to me. But Joe Harris has been really, really good this year. Spencer Dinwiddie has obviously been awesome this year. Joe Harris would just be like a rental for you. So I think he's probably worth like a second round pick. Maybe you just do Smart, Nader, a first and a second for Joe Harris, just to satisfy what Brooklyn needs. You need to have Nader in there to make the money work, I believe. Or no, you don't. You don't have to do that. You can make the money work regardless. It could just be Smart and Dinwiddie for Harris, or Smart for Dinwiddie and Harris plus the first and second round pick. That's the kind of thing that I would be trying to do if I was Boston, though, something along those lines. And for Brooklyn,
it's really interesting.
I'm sorry. For Brooklyn, I think it makes sense because you could have Marcus Smart for 4 years as opposed to Dinwiddie for potentially a year and a half. And I like the idea of pairing Marcus Smart with Jeremy Lin and D'Angelo Russell defensively.
Yeah, I really like that. And it's interesting you went about the Marcus Smart with trying to acquire a player back when most of the discussion has been the pick just because they can't really afford a player. But if you get somebody on a reasonable contract and that's kind of how you're approaching it, there's got to be some kind of avenues out there. I mean, the Nets one was great, but finding another team potentially to take on Marcus Smart with a returning player that has a reasonable contract, maybe that's how they go about their business instead of just trying to dump him for a first-round pick if they can even get that, which it doesn't sound like they can yet.
I mean, honestly, I would probably be willing to give up a first-round pick for Marcus Smart. If it was a later first-round pick, I think I would probably do that. I don't really know of the team that it would make sense for. I mean, maybe it's Brooklyn. Maybe it's Brooklyn, that number 27 pick that they have from Toronto right now. Maybe that's the move.
I would too. I mean, you think about the expected return on your pick there. I think Marcus Smart surpasses that pretty easily. And then you secure his restricted free agency rights. And we've already talked about how the market's going to be suppressed this summer. You could potentially get Smart on a value contract. Yeah. I mean, it's not inconceivable you could get him for like $10 million a year. I think that's a good contract for Marcus Smart.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know about if Brooklyn is interested, but that's the kind of move that makes sense to me. Boston tries to go out and actually get a player that can help them this year and next year for Marcus Smart. Tyreek just doesn't do it for me. Let's move on. Toronto, again, a pretty set team to me. I don't know if they're going to be super active. I think that they could probably go for some talent consolidation at some point, but I also don't really want to mess with this bench unit and don't really want to mess with the chemistry that the starting lineup has either.
It's tough to find like a suitable deal for them that makes sense for their personnel. Like last year, PJ Tucker made a ton of sense for them. I completely understood that trade. I don't really see anybody that would really come in and give them the same caliber of play for what they have to deal in assets. I mean, they've already sacrificed their first-round pick in the DeMarre Carroll trade. Again, we just talked about that with the Nets. And their ancillary pieces are nice, like Jakob Poeltl. Those guys are good players. Dolan Wright's been a lot better this year. Van Vliet's been great for them. So all of those guys are nice players, but if you're trying to aggregate them, first of all, it's hard to do via their salary. But second, like, what is that really going to return you as far as a potential impact piece? So they're another team. They're kind of similar to Houston, where I think they're probably just going to stay the course. There has been some talk of Rodney Hood. I don't think they're going to be able. They're not going to be able to pay him in the future. So there's a lot of contract ramifications as well for them. Yeah,
if I'm them, I think I'm just going to stand pat. The talent consolidation idea, to me, I think that's an off-season idea that you pursue. You don't try and do it in the middle of the season and shake up this roster. San Antonio sitting at 34-21. I think that it would make sense for them to try and pursue an upgrade. I just don't know what it is. It is the tough part for them. Like, I think that they could actually make a decent amount of sense for Tyreek, but I'm not giving up their first round pick given how well they draft for Tyreek.
Oh, I wouldn't either. Not for San Antonio. I mean, they put those to value. Derek White's probably going to show something when he eventually gets some more playing time. Yeah, they're so tough just because I feel like so many of their moves I haven't really understood. Like even the Patty Mills extension, it was fair, honestly, at the time. But it's like, what are you guys building towards? Like, what are you trying to do? I thought they would try to get into the sweepstakes this summer or next summer as far as free agency goes. Giving out the Pau Gasol extension, LaMarcus Aldridge, all of that stuff is. I just don't know what their trajectory is right now. And you look at their roster, what could they really get in a trade? Like what piece? They're not going to move DeJounte probably. Not going to move Rudy Gay. Danny Green could get you something, but probably nothing as good as Danny Green himself. So I don't know what they do.
Yeah, I just don't see the purpose in trading Danny Green. Like, I think that he's just too valuable to what they want to do.
Agree.
That just makes not a crazy amount of sense to me. I wonder if the Knicks could give them the salary relief from Powell, but I don't know that they see Powell as like a negative. Is another issue, because like you could do the Baker, O'Quinn, McDermott like expiring money for Powell and make that work, and like you could say like, okay, we'll take that. You give us a first round pick, you give us a second round pick or something like that, and we get an asset. We get Powell. You get money in the future. I don't know that they feel like that's something that's useful to them, though. Like, I think they value Powell.
And I think it's hard to gauge just by the contract, because it could have been like a wait-and-see thing where they paid Powell a little bit more just because he kind of waited a little bit in free agency while they tried to pursue other people. It could just be that they valued him at that number. So if they're valuing him at $16 million a year, when a lot of other teams didn't do that, maybe they like him in their scheme. They value him in their organization. So I don't think they probably view him as an albatross. Like, he's definitely not a Myers Leonard for them, like Myers Leonard is to Portland.
Minnesota, anything there?
What can they just don't have a lot of mechanisms to improve, really. I just don't really know. Looking at their roster, I mean, they have no trade exceptions. It would have to be who's really drawing interest in a trade. Like Taj Gibson, Gorgie Dang, both those guys are probably overpaid, honestly, in this market.
And there's no way Tibbs is trading Taj.
Yeah. So you look on the roster, it's like Cole Aldridge. That's more of a salary dump scenario. Maybe they could take on a worse contract long term and get an asset. But none of their ancillary pieces move the needle at all. Like Shabazz Muhammad's not getting you anything. Tyus Jones has been great this year, but they kind of need him. So I don't know. They don't really have a lot of maneuverability. They just don't have. I mean, they get that first round pick from Oklahoma City this year, which is lottery protected, but they're also setting out their first round pick lottery protected to Atlanta. So some pick complications, but also it's just they just don't have a lot of wiggle room. They went all in on kind of their starting lineup, and that's it.
The trade I saw Matt Moore, good friend of the show that was just on Monday, float was something like Gorgie Jang, Tyus Jones, and that first round pick from Oklahoma City for Marc Gasol. That is interesting to me. Making a move for using Jang's money as well as Tyus Jones in that first to go out and get like an actual difference maker makes sense to me. But again, that seems more like an off-season trade as opposed to a now trade.
I mean, if Memphis would entertain that, that's something I would definitely look at. I just can't really see that being enough unless they really, really love Tyus. So that would be the one scenario where that would work. But I don't see that moving the needle. And I think other teams could probably outbid them if that was the deal for Mark.
I agree. The last team I'm going to float to you, we've talked about them a billion times on this podcast. The Cleveland Cavaliers. Can you fix the Cavs?
Gosh, I mean, if that Shumpert Fry for George Hill deal is still on the table, I would do that. I know it's $19 million for Hill next year, but it at least helps you short term. If they could get Avery Bradley and then part with their own first round pick, I would do that too. I think that Bradley's even if he's an expiring, would help them just tremendously. He's exactly the kind of player you want in the playoffs to guard the perimeter against some of these lead guards. If they play the Warriors in the finals, if they get that far, they're going to need somebody that can guard Steph, and he definitely fits the bill for that. There are different ways. I mean, I would inquire on Nerlens Noel. I know that doesn't have a lot of allure, but as a kind of a low-key option, maybe like a protected second rounder, if you can get him for really cheap, he's at least someone who can protect the rim. He has athleticism. They have so much athleticism deficiencies. The really interesting stuff is when you start getting into the Brooklyn pick and what you would do with that. I think it would kind of have to take someone like a Kemba for me. I wouldn't do it for DeAndre Jordan personally. I don't know how you feel about that.
I would not do it for DeAndre. I know that like there's a complication that you can't really combine Avery Bradley with DeAndre Jordan. But if you said like, hey, we'll trade you Tristan Thompson and salary matching and the Brooklyn pick for DeAndre, and then you trade us Avery Bradley for Channing Frye or something like that to like make it work in terms of both Bradley and Jordan for the Brooklyn pick. That's something I would entertain and ultimately decide no on at the end of the day. I just don't think that it's worth giving up the Brooklyn pick for those two guys. The more I've thought about that in the past as a way to do it, but the more I think about it, the more I just don't know that those two guys fix this team enough to where it's worth giving up the long-term viability of the Brooklyn pick.
I agree with you. I think I would probably do it for Kemba, though. He's the guy that, I mean, you put him next to LeBron, you need firepower against like the best teams, and they just don't have enough of that right now. I mean, they lost so much with Kyrie, and Isaiah's not giving them that same dynamic. So if I could get Kemba for the Brooklyn pick, I would entertain that, honestly. I think that he's on a reasonable enough contract for them, too, with their financial situation. I'm not sure if Charlotte would do that, but maybe you could construct a deal to make that passable.
Well, if you're going to do it, you'd have to take on some of their money. You'd have to take on Marvin Williams, Kid Gilchrist, or Gulp, Nick Batum. Like, that's just the only way that would work for them, I think. Let's move on. Let's talk about the final thing we're going to talk about on this podcast. Cole has been the greatest fan of Jaren Jackson this side of the Mississippi River.
That's
I am a fan of Jaren. I am actually a huge fan of Jaren Jackson. I have him right now at number 5 on my NBA draft board. So I am at the point where I am with you on Jaren Jackson. Let's kind of break down in detail what Jaren Jackson does and why a guy who is averaging the numbers that he is averaging, right around 11 points and 8 rebounds, and, what is it? He's probably at like 2 blocks a game, given how much he plays, maybe 2.5 blocks a game. Why this guy is considered a potential top 5 pick in the NBA draft. Cole, I am going to let you start this because, good God, you love this man more than I think anyone else.
That's a hell of an introduction. I think you got to start defensively. He could be a generational type defender, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. It's just you see the consistent motor in the focus, like his ability to react quickly. I've not seen that ability in a big since I've been like monitoring the draft. I didn't see Anthony Davis too closely, but Jaren's ability to react to drives, it's almost instantaneous that he gets to places. He overhelps, if anything. He wants to block shots, but it's not like he's chasing blocks. He just knows and instinctually understands when to rotate over to challenge, and he finishes plays. Second, third efforts. He has that kind of mentality and that focus and the demeanor. Like he just plays hard. He has kind of that KG-esque aura to him. I mean, I'm not comparing him to KG overall. I'm just saying that kind of that quarterbacking mentality for a defense, like you see with Draymond, the high-intensity guys. I think he can be a 2-level defensive player as far as guarding the perimeter well enough, which you don't see from a lot of these more albatross bigs that are more drop-back guys. I think he's good enough in space. And again, I just think, honestly, like he has the full package of what you want defensively outside of, not crazy girth. He's not DeAndre Ayton as far as build. And he does foul a lot, which is, at times it's really frustrating because he has so many boneheaded fouls. But I do feel like he can be that consistent anchor to your defense. He has the intellect. He has the instincts. And the ability to react, I can't state enough. He gets off the floor so quickly as a rim protector. I just have not seen it.
Well, it's that, and his second jump is really good. It's not even the first jump with him getting off the floor. It's a second jump. And because fucking idiot, I want to get the numbers right here. 11 points, 6 rebounds, 3.5 blocks a game. Only taking about 6 field goal attempts a game, but he's also up around 4 free throw attempts over the course of 22 minutes a night. That gives you 19.9 points, 10.8 rebounds, 6 blocks per 40 minutes. I want to start by talking about the way that he has unnatural body control for a defender that is 6'11" with a 7'4" wingspan and is 240 pounds. The way he closes out on jump shooters is remarkable to me. He is able to close out under control and still maintain his lateral athleticism to where if a guy tries to attack him, he can slide. He understands exactly how to keep his balance under control to where he is just lethally effective whenever a stretch 4 gets out on him, because that's ultimately what he's playing a lot of. He's playing a lot of the stretch 4.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the balance, you rarely see bigs that can close out in a stance and then immediately react to drives. It's just not in a lot of their arsenals at this age. And that stood out for me from day one watching his tape was he can come all the way across the key in a stance. He has choppy steps on his closeout D and then walls off the paint. And then he can turn and run too. Like he can block guys, he can turn and chase guys down, block shots at the rim. He has the mobility and he has the range. So you pair that with the interior defense, like I noted, and where's his defensive flaw really? All I see, it's not like just so much trying to pick out weaknesses, it's trying to optimize him. And you look at his best ceiling outcome, I see all the ingredients of a potentially elite NBA defensive player.
I agree with you. I think he is going to be an elite NBA defensive player. I don't really know how his defensive ability fails, to be honest. Like, I've seen some people complain about he's not like hyper explosive. I don't really get that. He is a pretty damn good leaper. And he's a quick leaper, not necessarily like a high jumper, I guess is maybe a better way to put it. Like, his max vertical might be, 33 inches or something like that, but it's how quickly he gets in the air that is impressive. You mentioned the idea of just his timing and instincts. I think that's where it comes into play. He is an unbelievable leaper.
And that's the kind of athleticism that goes unchecked by a lot of people. You look at raw explosiveness and like measurements and all that stuff, like physical testing. It's your ability to react quickly that I think really separates the elite athletes. And he reacts instantaneously to drives again. And that's his best quality, in my opinion, along with the intellect stuff, the ability to diagnose actions. He knows where to be as a positional defensive player. But yeah, really quick off the floor. And I just, outside of guarding behemoths like Joel Embiid in the post who can just overwhelm him, like Joel can overwhelm basically everybody in the league, or like a Drummond type on the boards at times, that's the only area of weakness I really see in his game. But if he can add the requisite strength to his frame, I think he has some physical upside there as well without losing that explosiveness, because he doesn't really rely on the leaping as far as height, like you noted. It's more like the instantaneous reaction ability, and then that second jump, third jump to close out the play.
Well, let's also bring this up too. I mean, he is the youngest player in this class among the elite level players. He is, I want to say, like a year and 4 months younger than Mohamed Bamba, right?
I think that's right, yeah. I think he's definitely the youngest of the yeah.
Like, he's very, very young for a freshman. He just turned 18, I believe, in September. So there's a lot of upside here. And let's talk about the offense, because I think that's where people get held up a little bit. His role in Michigan State's offense is minimal. He's just not asked to do a crazy amount. I mean, they have Miles Bridges, they have Cassius Winston, they have Josh Langford, who's a former McDonald's All-American. They have Nick Ward, who is one of the best post creators in the country. He's just not asked to be a primary creator, but he's shown some pretty significant flashes of the ability to create a little bit, though.
The Illinois game, that crossover that he had off the isolation play where he dunked, that was something I've always been kind of higher on his handling ability, just because I watched him in high school some, and I know he could grab and go, and he looked pretty fluid with the ball. He's always looked fast as far as good first step and everything. I didn't know he had that in his game, as far as legitimately taking a guy in isolation, beating him off the bounce, and then getting to the rim and finishing. That is a high-level play. And we talk about consistency a lot, but some of the plays that people make, you just have to take the flashes as indicative of future abilities. Like when you see Karl Towns at Kentucky shoot like a step-back, fadeaway jump shot, it's like, okay, like I only need to see that once. And with Jackson, he showed that ability, and it was like that heightens his offensive ceiling. If he can have a modicum of self-creation, if he can get the ball isolated against another five, take him off the bounce, get to the rim, that increases his ceiling outcome.
What do you think of his jump shot? It's obviously a little bit strange. It's like a little bit of a low release point, almost a push shot, not quite a push shot, though. What is your impression of it?
Yeah, it's kind of push shot-esque. He puts it out in front of his body. That's honestly the only area of weakness I see with him overall as a prospect.
There's one more that I'll get to in a second, but go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so I just don't know how multifaceted it could be. Like we're talking about catching the ball in the mid-post, elevating over the top of guys. He doesn't really have that kind of release, that high set point on the top of his forehead. It's more like out in the front of his body, which is fine. Like he sets up quickly and pick and pops. He can set his feet quickly, he gets shots off. I don't have an issue with his shot as far as the results in specific ways. But if we're talking about shooting a pull-up shot off the dribble or self-creating in the mid-post against NBA caliber size and length, that's when I kind of have some reservations about him. And that's really the only component of his game that I feel like will hinder his ceiling as far as that goes. And it's just tough because a lot of these other bigs in this class, like DeAndre Ayton, can catch the ball in the mid-post, face you up, jab step, you shoot over the top. Bagley can shoot off the dribble. So that's where I think you don't see the same ceiling being attributed to Jaren Jackson outside of just the general role like you noted. It's that the scoring and the self-creation elements with the mechanics of his jump shot don't look like a clean translation.
So what he's going to need to develop is the ability to knock down like a floater, right? Like to me, that's what it's going to come down to. He needs a floater game. Another concern that I have is he is 6'11" with a 7'4" wingspan and is currently only hitting 50.7% of his shots around the basket this year. That's a remarkably low number. That's actually below average. All college players, including guards. He needs to be better there. He needs to become more diversified in terms of his ability to finish around the basket. His jump shooting, you mentioned his shot off of the catch. Pretty solid number, 62.3 effective field goal percentage. That's fine. He's he can knock down shots off the catch. I don't think anyone worries about that. The fact, though, that he's only taken one jump shot off the dribble this entire year, I think is indicative of the fact that it's a really hard jump shot to get off the dribble. He does need a floater game. I think that that's going to be the key. If he starts to get that floater game going, that will make life easier for him. The other concern that I have, though, is that he's a really poor decision maker passing the ball. He is at 2 turnovers a game versus 1.2 assists. Pretty darn close to that 0.5 assist to turnover ratio that is very, very dangerous. I do think part of it is that Michigan State's offense is very clogged in general, just because teams trust Josh Langford as a shooter, but he'd probably rather drive if he had the chance. Miles Bridges, a shooter that is knocking down 39%, but would probably rather drive. Nick Ward, obviously, is a guy that is going to take up a ton of space, and Jackson doesn't play a ton of 5 because Ward's there. The other guys that he plays with, Xavier Tillman, Gavin Schilling, neither of those guys score from outside of 7 feet or whatever you want to say. So the floor is clogged, but I'd like to see him get that turnover number down. He's at a 19.5 turnover rate this year. That's a little too high for what I think he's capable of.
I think those are both valid concerns. I was just addressing it more as I think the shot is not going to be able to improve off the dribble. Just mechanically, there's a ceiling limitation on him because of that. If he had Anthony Davis's shot, that, there would be a whole new avenue for him to succeed at the NBA level. I agree with those two concerns. He's not that bouncy around the rim. I thought in the beginning of the year, especially, he was not a good finisher. I think some of that is the congestion there. You see him going up through traffic and trying to finish through 2 guys. In the NBA, that's probably going to be more like one guy. That one guy's going to be a lot better than anybody he faces in college, but maybe the extra space will do him a little bit of good. He has the length extension. I think he has some touch. I'm not sold on his touch yet. But yeah, the passing, I've never really viewed him as a decision-making type. I mean, maybe he can make it. He makes the extra pass and he's unselfish, but he's not going to be I don't think a dribble handoff guy who's making high-level decisions about, initiating your offense. I think he's more of a finishing type big with the ability to put the ball on the floor. So I agree. I think that's an important delineation to make, that he probably isn't this high-level playmaker for others, and that's going to cap his ceiling as well. But for what he needs to be, which is he has to shoot. I think we can start there. He has to shoot the ball to bring offensive value and peak offensive value for the big man position. I think he can survive without that. It's just his shot mechanics are something that I don't know can really ever improve. I think maybe he can improve with better spacing as far as making better passes, better plays, not drawing so many damn charges, and finishing better around the rim. I think those are improvable things, but the shot, again, is just something that is tough, because I don't ever see it becoming what it needs to be for him to be the highest level of offensive big.
Yeah, all told, I think he can be an all-star player. That's why I have him at number 5 on my board. I think that's totally within his realm of outcomes. But there is just that little bit missing. You know what I mean? And you can say that about every prospect this year. You can say it about Marvin Bagley's defensive position that you're super low on. You can say it about Mohamed Bamba's athletic or motor, and if it's going to run high every single night in, night out. You can say it about if Trae Young is going to be able to gain consistent separation, if he's going to be able to finish at the basket, and if the turnover rate is ever going to get under control. You can say it about Michael Porter's back. You can say it about, really, that's basically it. I mean, DeAndre Ayton is starting to get to the point where I don't have as many concerns, or Luka Doncic, I don't have as many concerns about them. But once you get past those top 2, those top, certain level guys, I think you get to the point where you're taking a flawed guy regardless. And I think that Jaren Jackson has among the highest floors of those flawed guys.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think it kind of goes to philosophy a little bit as far as what we want in a prospect. Like with bigs, I always look to defense first for the most part. And Jaren, I feel the best about him defensively of anybody in this class. I think he's the best defensive player in this class. A lot of people would say Bamba. I think that Jaren brings that ability more consistently. Like Bamba, you watched him against Oklahoma. He was not reacting quickly to drives. He was not getting off the floor quickly, and he just was not running the floor. At times, he was like, kind of half-assing his way back, and I don't see that with Jackson. I see the consistent motor, and we talked about this when we did, I can't remember what pod we did, but we talked about consistency and how important that is, and that's what I see from him on a game-by-game basis. Like, he makes some stupid mistakes as far as fouls, but he brings it mentally every single time on defense. And if we're talking about a guy we know that works at the NBA level, like a Draymond Green, what separates him from other guys in the league outside of ridiculous versatility and all of that? It's that consistent mental approach. And that's what I see from Jackson, and that's just what I prefer. And I think you can make arguments. I mean, most prospects are flawed, all right? Everybody is, for the most part. Like, Ayton still has some rim protection issues, even though he's definitely improved there. The instincts and the reactionary stuff, I'm still not seeing to the level. But
sure.
When you talk about Jaren as far as his ceiling, I think he probably deserves a little bit more credit just because he can still find ways to offensive value via volume, three-point shooting. If he can take guys off the dribble, in space, that's going to have value. And he has such a high coordination baseline with his age, like you noted, that he can improve. He can definitely improve. And we talked about another thing, upward trajectory with players. I think Jaren is that guy.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. I'm going to have him at number 5 on my board, just one spot below Mohamed Bamba. But the more I think about it, I mean, it's hard for me to make the case for Bamba over him, just because in many ways you're essentially betting on upside with Mohamed Bamba, but like Jaren Jackson has the same block rate as Mohamed Bamba, and that's like very clearly Bamba's best skill set is rim protection, right? Jackson just brings a more diversified skill set night in, night out, wouldn't you say?
Exactly. I think that's right. I mean, with Bamba, you're conceptually saying, I want this guy to be able to space the floor eventually, and it's a lot of ifs. And like you said, it's a ceiling outcome play. But Jaren's floor as a defensive player is, in my opinion, already there. Like, it's not maybe to the possible season that Bamba could have. Everything goes right for him. He becomes Gobert, who's a little bit more mobile. But if we're talking about likelihood of occurrence, Jackson profiles as an elite defensive player. So if that's going to be Bamba's main output, Jackson's definitely better in space. So why wouldn't he be afforded as much upside as someone like Bamba when there's more actual evidence, especially offensively, that he can be a valuable two-way player?
Yeah, no, I think I'm right there with you. Cole, do you have anything else you want to talk about before we get out of here?
I think that's good, man. I'm always down to talk about Jaren Jackson, as people can probably tell.
Cole is the biggest Jaren Jackson fan I've ever met in my life. Tell the people where they can find your work.
At thestepien.com. I'm actually doing a write-up that will be out tomorrow, touching on some of these topics about pull-up shooting for bigs and kind of what that says about their coordination, using some past examples of Towns, Embiid in college, Anthony Davis, and then looking at the bigs in this class and who has that kind of self-creation element to their game that can add value that way. So it's just kind of a different way to think about prospects and a specific skill set that could, speak to ceiling outcome. As usual, at the Ode to Odin podcast with Sean Darenthal, I'll do that once a week. We're going to do Marvin Bagley and Wendell Carter later this week, so that'll be interesting. And then, as usual, on this podcast, and thanks for having me again, man.
Please go rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. It really helps us move up in the ratings. We're available on Stitcher. We're available on Pocket Casts, whatever Pocket Casts is. I just found that out yesterday whenever I had to help someone out. Google Play, Android, SoundCloud, Spotify, whatever podcasting app you use, please use it to subscribe, rate, review to this show. Please also go subscribe to The Athletic. I know that one costs you money, but I would really appreciate it because it keeps me employed and it keeps me making money. And it's always helpful for me to have a profession in this career of mine. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you all taking the time. Until next time, though, we'll talk soon. Bye.